Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blue Mondays, the GLORIO Blog's Eureka 7 recap podcast. I am your host, Zigg, and I am joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Aqua Gaze. How are you doing, Aqua?
I'm good. I've taken a month off to be reconstructed in a hidden lab somewhere to reflect the personal growth of my pilots, and I'm ready to roll.
I'm not going to get into the is Ratatouille a mech debate that has cropped up time and time again since then. Suffice to say, I'm glad you are rebuilt to face the challenge ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, we have been off for a week because both Aqua and I were far afield in parts unknown. But we're back. And this week we are going to be looking at episode 31, Animal Attack, and episode 32, Start It Up. Unfortunately, our return has coincided with G's absence, so he is not with us this week, but hopefully he will be back soonish. Did you have any sort of big picture overview of these episodes before we kick off, Aqua?
Well, there's a couple of things. It is sort of the start of a new arc where, the Gecko State have been reformed. They have now set up shop at the laboratory to get the Nerve Ash running again. And the new sort of overarching plot is that Dewey Novak is stepping up to the plate once more as the main villain. He has he is putting his plans into motion, and that of course also means a grand return for Dominic, who has not really been absent but is coming back to the forefront, and Anemone, of course, who has been kind of absent from the whole Ray and Charles debacle. So after the sort of transition we had in the last couple of episodes, these two really give us, follow up on the major reveals from the last episode, while also setting up a new status quo that will be our playing ground for the next couple of episodes, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I would say that these episodes are really sort of Dewey's coming out party as the main villain, because, from the very beginning of the show, he has been set up to be the major bad guy, but he's kind of not appeared much up to this point, and it's mostly been in the background in sort of vaguely threatening, but not really active ways. So this is the first time he's sort of taken center stage and made his mark on the ongoing narrative, I would say.
It's sort of symbolic, right? Because Dewey is obviously meant to symbolize a kind of like fascist-coded, charismatic strong man who will fix the world with his one solution for everything. And I think his sort of downplayed role up until now has kind of reflects this whole idea of like, oh, these kinds of people amass power in the shadows, and once they come into the forefront, it's already too late, as our main characters realize in these two episodes.
Yes, I think there's a little bit, and as G is not here, I'm going to have to step into the role of making everything related to Gundam, but I think Dewey resembles Shah Aznable a little bit as well, in the sense that he is the face of the bad guys, but he sort of has not been a huge factor for a large part of the narrative up to this point, and it's only now that the conflict is becoming more personal and more focused on sort of the head-to-head rivalry between our characters that Dewey is stepping up and sort of, I don't want to say kind of like making it serious, but because it's obviously been serious up to this point, but kind of you get the feeling that the gears are moving for the true objective of the story now, right? Yeah.
It's kind of like a common occurrence in these kinds of epic sci-fi stories where, as you say, the main face of the bad guys will usually start off like as a kind of not necessarily rank and file kind of bad guy, but he has to answer to a superior officer, and throughout the story grows into more and more power. Right? This is something you see with Darth Vader, for example, or even more prominently in Kylo Ren in the reboot or in the sequel movies. Yeah. And you see it with Shah Aznable, and you see it with Dewey here as well.
Yes, and I think that's because it gives us a narrative on the enemy side to follow, and in the case of mecha shows in particular, it means that it gives you an enemy that is not the status quo, right? Because if the status quo is just the enemy, then that can be an issue as to why nothing has been done up to this point. The introduction of a new villain serves as an escalation. The world is now actively in more danger because Dewey is enacting his fiendish plan or whatever, right?
And it also helps because, like, especially with Char, you can turn a personal rival for your main character into this large-scale threat.
Right, yes. And the one thing I will say is that I don't think Dewey has been a particularly personal rival to our heroes at some point, but we have gotten the hints that he might be. We know he has a history with Holland and Ray and Charles, for example, and it's not much of a spoiler to say that stuff is going to come to the front and center increasingly as time goes by there. But these episodes definitely serve to set out his stall as kind of the visionary villain there. So let's move into episode 31, Animal Attack. The thing I will say is that the musical references this week are pretty obscure, so I'm not going to go through the song and dance of asking you about them. I'm just going to tell you here. Animal Attack is named after a song by the Japanese electro DJ Fumiya Tanaka. He is still out there, still doing it. He is a long-running dance club techno DJ, originally from Japan, now based in Berlin, which is pretty much the mecca of electronic music.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
On the European continent, at least there. This is a song from his 1995 EP that is just called 4 Tracks, I believe, and it does indeed have 4 tracks. But yeah, definitely one of the more obscure figures that we have had a shout out from there. But I think, as we've seen in the past, this reflects Daisato and the writing team's fairly deep knowledge of 90s and early 2000s techno and club stuff.
It is referential in a way that only something deeply personal can have inspired a work, right?
And the references throughout the show have been, have spanned all the way from extremely obvious to to extremely niche, and I think they've been a pretty good spread generally. But let's get into talking about the episode there. And this episode starts with some people we haven't seen for a long time, namely the Council of Sages, who are theoretically in charge, but haven't really played an active role in the plot for a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, if this episode is meant to reflect the change of power within the Federation, it's only appropriate to start out with a little look at what the supposed people in power are up to, even though we haven't seen them in like 30 episodes.
And what they have been up to is chilling in a space station, apparently, or rather the top of an orbital escalator. Elevator, rather.
Orbital escalator would be pretty cool.
An orbital escalator would be pretty cool, yes. We do get a few little details here, namely that no Sage has left the tower in over a decade. They have not set foot on the surface of the planet.
They are quite literally living in an ivory tower, huh?
Yes, the symbolism here is pretty obvious and not subtle, but yes, I mean, we're focused on the female Sage here, despite the fact that she is called Lord Coda, one of the weird gender mix-ups in Japanese translation there, I think.
I'm assuming they're using a gender-neutral term in Japanese that they sort of defaulted to the male for.
I think they just used Coda-sama.
Sure.
But obviously, in most translations, we would go with Lady Coda instead. I'm not sure how deliberate that is, or whether they deliberately wanted to emphasize the non-gendered position. But she is our viewpoint Sage for most of this. The other two don't really appear, but they make their presence felt, let's say. But that's just kind of a very brief introduction there. But very soon we're back to the lab, whose name temporarily escapes me. God damn it!
I don't recall either. It's the secret lab.
Yes, it's. Give me a second. Tresor. That's it. Tresor.
Right.
Trestle Lab, where work continues, and we open with an extremely gratuitous Talho crotch shot for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's to remind you that despite her de-yassification, Talho is still super hot.
Yes, as I think I mentioned at the end of the last episode, it's only in anime that going to wearing a skin-tight catsuit could be described as a fan service downgrade, quite frankly. But we do get a fun little bit here at the beginning with new Talho and Mathieu and Hilda, and just Mathieu cracking wise and getting slapped about a bit for it.
Yeah, because of course her cutting her hair makes Mathieu think that she got dumped.
Yes.
Whereas Hilda, of course, knows that in no sane universe would Talho ever get dumped. It would be the other way around.
Look, Holland knows he is punching way above his weight class. Okay, it's a fun, goofy character bit. It sort of establishes something about this episode which is quite notable, which is there's a lot of weird, wacky, like fewer frames are funnier animation.
It is a very
episode.
Cartoony episode.
Yes, which is quite odd because this is also quite a serious episode in some regards, but there is definitely a sort of scratchy, low budget feel to a lot of it, which it's not gratuitous. I mean, this episode still looks absolutely fine. There's no catastrophe here, but you're right. There is a lot more cartoonish sort of pratfalling in this episode.
It's not necessarily intrusive or disruptive to the overall vibe that they're going with, because the show has always been able to marry comedy and drama relatively well. It's just that the comedy has a slightly different edge than what we're used to, right? There's lots of looking at the camera with an exaggerated face. There's lots of strange camera angles to highlight the absurdity of a certain situation. It is way more coded in a way that an anime comedy is traditionally coded, right? You almost expect the characters to go super deformed at some point.
Yes, that it, like you say, it's not a particularly egregious example, but it does feel quote unquote wacky in that way a little bit, which again, not a huge problem, but does occasionally feel a little out of step with the very serious stuff that this episode is dealing with.
I get the feeling it's maybe also a sort of an attempt to hit the reset button to get things back on track now that Gecko State are more or less a stable, quote-unquote, family again, if that makes sense.
Perhaps. I mean, definitely, as you said at the beginning, we're sort of launching into a new arc here, but there's still some pretty heavy stuff coming up, and fairly soon, so I'm using my advanced knowledge of what happens here, but there's some fairly serious stuff coming up, so I'm not necessarily sure about the idea of resetting the tone so much as I just think it's just one of those weird things that might be a quirk of this episode's director or this episode's storyboarder or something like that. It's just one of those things, I think, there, but it's fun to note. I do really like that we start this episode, well, I say start, we've had 2 scenes already, but I do really like that we get a good, nice, long Renton and Eureka bit at the beginning here as well. They're very cute doing the washing up in their matching outfits, and it's just nice to see them hanging out together again.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a kind of like a sort of recap of what they have gone through, right? They are able to talk honestly about themselves, almost to a point where it's kind of embarrassing how honest they are. No, they go literally like, "Oh, I really like being around you, Renton. I really like talking to you, Eureka." Like,
Eureka at least has the excuse that she is like an artificial, like monster girl, but Renton is just dumb. He's just a loser. He's just an idiot.
Yeah, I mean, he talks the way he wants her. She wants him to talk. And
my notes literally here just say, "Get a grip, man."
I mean, she seems to be into it. So
yeah, but he's like losing his shit because they're touching shoulders. Like, come on. Yeah, but
well. You do say that, but he does go in. He does go in for the big one.
He goes in for it and is hilariously cock-blocked by a robot again. We do, like, in more serious stuff, though, we do start to touch upon some of what Eureka's remaining baggage is here, which is yes, she's become a more complete, self-assured human person, but that also means she's plagued by like introspection and doubt now, right?
And immense guilt. Like, I think
Yes.
a thorough line in these 2 episodes is how now that she has been reunited with Renton and her situation has more or less stabilized, I think both in a physical and an emotional sense, the change that she's gone through has suddenly made her realize how much responsibility she has, both rationally and irrationally, and this sort of comes piling down onto her, and she spends most of these 2 episodes feeling incredibly responsible for what is going on, either through her action or her inaction.
Right, but I mean, even before the stuff that we're about to get to starts happening, this is about her guilt for all the things she has already done, right? About the military, and she expresses guilt about dirtying Renton's hands as well, even though objectively he got involved of his own free will. And I just think it's interesting because this is part of her character growth, right? Her actualization as a person means also that she has to deal with the things that she did back when she was less of a person, let's say, when she didn't worry about things like guilt and responsibility. So it's kind of, it's tough for her. But
the idea is very much that now that she has embraced change, she must realize that changing does not mean that you can simply press the reset button on your past, right? That you can't run away from it all.
Yeah, and I think part of that as well is her origins, which naturally are going to be a fairly major theme going forward there. Speaking of Renton getting cockblocked by a robot, we definitely have, I'm going to say the sort of lashing out Nervash here is very Evangelion coded, as one might expect there. It's nowhere near as horrifying as that.
Right, that's the thing, right? It's Eva coded, as in the robot has a sentience, but it's also kind of goofy in that at least Eureka interprets it as, it's Nervash wants to change because I have changed, so he doesn't want to go back to the way he used to be. You need to give him a cool upgrade.
Yeah, it's a little on the nose, really. I mean, I think she says he just wants you to accept him for what he is now. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, we get it. We get it. And I haven't talked too much about Daisato, the head writer, because there were a lot of different writers on this show, but I think these episodes do reveal some of his weaknesses in plotting, which perhaps carried over to the future and is why we have a much more mixed reputation of him now, which is that there is a little bit of what I like to call makes you think revelations about this. It's like, it's not that deep, bro, sometimes, but we get the point, right? The Nervash doesn't want to go back to how it was. It wants to have a cool mid-season upgrade, which will necessitate a new toy / action figure / kit for it there.
Don't we all?
Don't we all? Yes. We also get introduced to a new character here via the medium of Jobs being weirdly hyper and keyed up, which again is an example of the weird kind of comedy animation that we get a lot in this episode.
Also, shout out to Doggy just sleeping on Gidget's shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's got the right idea, honestly. But yes, we're introduced to Greg Egan, aka Dr. Bear, an extremely large man in every sense of the word, who is an expert on the Nervash, on Corellians, on pretty much everything to do with Eureka. Before you ask, Greg Egan is a real person. He's a noted hard sci-fi author, and by hard sci-fi author, I mean this guy has written maths papers, so it's that kind of sci-fi. He is still writing, but he's Australian, and his work has always been particularly big in Japan. He's won a bunch of awards there for like best foreign language novel and novella and stuff like that. So certainly not a household name, but something that might have been more familiar to hardcore sci-fi otaku in Japan in 2005, let's say.
Right. A nice little homage.
Indeed, yes. we learn some other things about Dr. Bear, which is he used to be married to Misha, which is kind of an insane pairing when you think about it there.
I mean that is what makes it funny and charismatic,
yes.
right?
Yeah. What was your first impression of Dr. Bear here?
I mean, my first impression is mostly that his character design looks completely different from everyone else. He has the very, well, we call it a gonk, right? This kind of almost grotesque sort of cartoonish character who doesn't really seem like he fits in a lot.
He's way more of a cartoon than pretty much everybody else in this show, who generally look pretty realistic because that's Kenichi Yoshida's art style, right? So, of course,
this is sort of meant to reflect the idea that he is an outsider from regular society, right? He is someone who does not really behave or think in ways that are quote unquote normal. He is someone who is, he's a man of science. He's completely obsessed with his topic of expertise.
There's definitely an element of the classic mad scientist about him, like the tiny glasses, the enormous head, the sort of quirky manner. There's definitely sort of a bit of a Frankenstein air about him, really, although he appears largely benevolent.
Right. At the same time, they make him almost cuddly, right? He is Dr. Bear. He's like a big, like, huggable guy who just wants to do the right thing.
Yes, and he gives us some important exposition as well here via the weird mechanism of revealing that he has a copy of the golden record that was on Voyager 1 and 2, a recurring thing in fiction that people seem to be fascinated by.
I mean, is it a copy? It might just...
He says it's a replica. He says
okay, sure.
Yeah. No, he specifically says it's a replica, but I mean, this does establish one very important thing, which is namely our history happened. Yeah, our history. Well, we kind of knew we were not on Earth already, right? But, I mean,
but we did not know that this is a world in which Earth, as we know it, exists, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, like this proves that our history happened in the past of this story, which has not been apparent before. There's been a lot of stuff that has suggested this is an entirely constructed world, right? But yes, this is the first thing that has explicitly tied our known real history into the story of Eureka 7, and there's a couple of other things as well in this episode that allude to that. I mean, at one point Coda says that humanity cannot go back on their spaceships, right? So the implication is fairly strong that humanity came from Earth to this world,
right? I mean, this is like the first actual confirmation we get that space travel exists in this universe, right? Because we started off with the revelation that the sages live in space.
Yes, and the technology level in Eureka 7 has already been highly futuristic, obviously, but Space Elevator is a level beyond even that, I think. So this society is perhaps more advanced at the upper levels, certainly, than we even realized before. Dr. Bear's other big idea is that he appears to be a believer in the Adrock theory, namely that the scub coral is a sentience.
That the scub coral is the kind of conscious manifestation of the planet's will, and that the things that we refer to as Corellians are avatars or manifestations of that sentience, right?
Right, yeah, and we spoke a lot about this in the last episode, what with the revelation of Eureka's true nature, of course, but this is kind of a restatement of some of those ideas, and perhaps a more explicit nod to the idea. He describes Eureka as perhaps a messenger. He compares her to the Voyager disk.
She's the Silver Surfer.
Yeah, basically, she's the herald of Galactus. But his theory is that she is a messenger. He describes her as a blank piece of paper. What did you take from this conversation / description of her, really?
I think the idea is because he phrases it as a positive thing, that she is a blank piece of paper. And this would sort of place Eureka in this category of like these kinds of alien herald characters who come to Earth to study mankind and live among us in order to sort of cast judgment on what and who we are as a species. I think that's part of it. I mean, it is both a literal and a metaphorical thing, right? He says she's a blank piece of paper because she came into this world probably not knowing what she was, not having emotions, not having a sense of self, and she is being written, as a
Yes.
blank piece of paper would be as we speak. But that can also like reveal a certain kind of intentionality behind or for who sent her, right? The idea is almost like, oh, you put a message in a bottle, you put a blank piece of paper in a bottle, you throw it in the sea, and you see what the person who catches it will write back to you.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
I think that's the key idea here, right? That, I mean, the Voyager comparison is meaningful in more than one way because she is a probe. She is a probe sent to humanity to see what they will do with her, really. It is, as you say, the whole purpose of sending a blank piece of paper is to see what the other person will write on it. And so Eureka, and again, this was sort of alluded to in the previous episodes, but not so explicitly, is sort of here to study and learn and be changed by humanity. That's the idea, at least. There, it's worth pointing out here that although Dr. Bear is very bought into this idea, Misha is not. Misha does not believe that the scub coral is sentient.
She is like surprisingly skeptical of it for someone who has been so close to Eureka for such a long time, right?
Yes, and that skepticism isn't really gone into here, but I think it's an interesting counter perspective, and I think we'll get more of it as we go there. Dr. Bear does have one other thing to say, which is he's not entirely sure if humanity and the scub coral can continue to coexist on this world, which events will perhaps begin to bear out that as well. But let's get back to Dewey, who, in deciding to become evil, has decided to assemble the most visible sign of being an evil overlord you possibly can. He's got a squad of killer teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, if Dr. Bear is concerned that scub coral and humans cannot live together, then Dewey is here to prove that.
I mean, Dewey is also very concerned that the scub coral and humans cannot live together. He is just approaching it from a radically different viewpoint.
Right.
We have had a few references to Agaha Squad before now, but this is where we find out what Agaha Squad are, which is they are 4 teenage girls who are delightfully chipper and will kill without a second thought.
In other words, he has combined the unwavering dedication of Dominic with the insanity of Anemone, and as is shown later, has also sort of abandoned these two in favor of the cooler, newer, more psycho models.
Who could possibly have seen this coming? This sequence where Dewey meets with Coda the Sage is very interesting for a whole bunch of reasons. For a start, it reveals that Dewey has some weird jamming technology. It also reveals that the Sages are basically in open or like semi-open warfare against each other, which unsurprising, but still kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's always like the idea that if you have political power concentrated in a group of people, they will be vying against one another in order to become the real kingmakers, right?
Right. Yes, and this is proven by the fact that one of Coda's handmaidens. There's a lot of religious imagery surrounding the Sages in this episode.
I
right?
mean, the handmaidens literally look like the handmaidens from The Handmaid's Tale. Like,
yes, or nuns, basically.
Yeah.
They look like nuns. When Coda arrives on Earth, there is like an honor guard for her, and the dude prostrates himself in front of her like she's a Chinese emperor or something like that. There's a lot of gratuitous religious imagery here. There's a lot of talk of religious stuff, and the intention is very clearly to set these figures up as sort of secular gods, right? People who dwell in the heavens and pass judgment on the people below.
I mean, they are very much coded in that, like, ancient monarch kind of way, right? The absolute monarchs who determine protocol and traditions and rituals, and Dewey represents the new order, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this scene ends with Dewey being a creep and
this weirdly sexual scene.
I mean, I don't think it's weirdly sexual. I think it is definitely intended to be sexual. The weird thing is that Coda seems like she's kind of into it, which don't know how to feel about that.
I guess the blushing is sort of meant to represent that this is a vaguely sexual gesture more than that she's into it, I think.
It's hard to say. It's certainly Freud would be rolling in his grave, put it that way. I think the idea is intended to be that, like, the sages have been so distant and so detached from human interaction, the pleasures of the flesh for so long that, Dewey represents a dangerous level of sexuality. I don't think they quite pull it off because I don't think we have seen enough of either Coda or Dewey to make that believable at this point, really.
Yeah, and it's a kind of cheap way to, like, sell a cool male villain to have a female character be like, oh, he's so, sexually aggressive.
Yeah, it's just kind of like the sexy, vampy villain who falls in love with the bad guy, and before he inevitably betrays her, spoilers, I guess. But
Urabuchi, is that you?
I mean, it's not just Urabuchi; it is fiction for all time. Resident Evil 5 is always one of the worst examples of this I remember, but honestly, it's been in fiction for time immemorial, and it feels cheap. I think there's a lot of interesting tension in this scene, and I think they could have expressed it in a much more interesting way.
That's the thing, right? It is cheap because it is literally cheap. It is a universally recognized device that you can just sort of put in there without having to do the work. But because they've never really done anything to tell us anything about Coda the Sage or how she, experiences the world. And similarly, Dewey has never been framed in this kind of like sexual or aggressive way before, but simply because we have, big, strong man and blushing, whimpering woman, we immediately get what they're trying to sell us, and they don't even have to do the actual work to do it, right?
Yes, and I mean, I think we have just not seen enough of Dewey to really get a measure of his personality beyond super evil and dangerously charismatic, right? And I can perhaps buy the dangerously charismatic part, but this just kind of feels like they're going for a cheap story link with no real context. Right. It's not ruinous, but there are ways to do female villains without having them be vamps.
Yeah, and they're sort of skipping a hurdle here, right? They're taking a shortcut into actually putting in the effort to make Dewey sort of darkly charismatic. That is only one step above people just saying, "Wow, that Dewey sure is charismatic."
Yeah, it definitely feels, as we've said repeatedly, cheap, and which is out of character with a lot of the writing in this show, which has gone to great effort to sort of reinforce the depth of the characterization there. But there is some important stuff in this conversation as well, which is, unsurprisingly, Dewey is for total destruction of the Corellians, and he predicts that there will perhaps be some antibody reactions, which sounds like a metaphor in context, but very rapidly turns out to not be a metaphor at all.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I was pretty like certain what he was talking about when he mentions antibodies, right? There's no real other way to take that.
Yeah. I mean, let's dive into it. Yeah. This episode features a bunch of freaky ass alien Cthulhu monster goofy things appearing and wiping out most of a city. What was your reaction to this? Because it's really weird.
I mean, the monsters sort of God, I forgot his name, but it is the mangaka of Bokurano who also designed some of the angels in Evangelion and some of the monster bosses in Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor, who has this very distinct style where he indeed makes monsters that kind of look like weird shapes with eyes, but they're very distinctly monsters. And that's sort of the vibe I'm getting here. These otherworldly, almost kind of like cute mascotty creatures that can nevertheless, make your brain melt by looking at you.
Yeah, I believe the person you are referring to is Mohiro Kitaro.
Yes, that is his name.
But yes, these monsters are so weird they are almost comedic. They remind me a little bit of like the kind of goofy comedy monsters that you might get like in a children's illustrated book or something like that. There's almost something Roald Dahl-esque about them, honestly.
Right. Or like weird little guys from a Ghibli movie, like
Yeah.
the suit monsters and then things like that.
And I think that's kind of why this sequence is so effective, honestly, because it takes it from just kind of like drama and horror into this sort of almost surreal horror where everything is so heightened that there's almost a sense of bathos from everything that's happening.
Right.
And it's just sort of like the oddness of the situation kind of makes it more horrific, at least to me.
Absolutely. I think it's a very effective way to bring creepiness into or at least show how perverse this is, right? This is something that is not of this world. This kind of violence, but also just the sheer strangeness of it. This is not a human kind of violence. This is not soldiers shooting people or bombs destroying buildings.
Right.
This is something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, these monsters have the power to do the time bubble thing from Terminator 2, or if you prefer, the Vanilla Ice power from Stardust Crusaders. But
I mean, it also kind of shows that it shows what Dewey theorizes about them being antibodies, right? It shows, like, it is so weird and alienating that it sells the idea that no, this is the normal thing, and our human bodies and our human buildings are the strange thing that is now being eliminated. Even like the shape of these bubbles, these are not unpredictable explosions. Fire, explosions, bullets. These are random. Whereas this is like a almost precise sort of excision of a tumor with a surgical knife, and it sort of shows. It almost sells you on the idea that, these things are the real heirs to this planet, and we are a kind of disease or parasite that they're trying to get rid of.
An invader. Yeah. I think it is vitally important that it makes the threat of the Corellian real and tangible and dangerous, right? Because up until now, we have associated the Corellian with Eureka, who is our sole representative of the quote-unquote species. And because she's on the side of the angels, we automatically assume that the Corellian must be good, and, Dewey is bad because he wants to kill them. But we see that actually the threat that he is admittedly deliberately provoking here is very real. I think as well, the vast variety and weirdness of these monsters is so good at selling the alienness and strangeness and sort of inhumanity of the Corellian, because rather than give us, here is the monster, here is what the monster looks like, here is the form of the monster. Instead, we get all these completely random designs that give us no idea at all what a Corellian actually looks like. And in that way, they're successful at preserving the mystique of the Corellian as this vast, unknowable intelligence, right? It does not have a traditional monster form. It just has these weird sort of cast-off creatures that it is using to ravage humanity. So I think the surreality of the scene is so important to how effective it is.
It is noticeable because it's, of course, just a bigger sort of manifestation of how we've seen Corellians up until now, which is as these weird spherical storms. And it's kind of the same idea, right? This is a force of nature. This is something that does not care about the puny human lives. It's almost as if these monsters are just kind of minding their own business and everyone dies around them. Like,
we do get emphasis on the scale as well, because we see the Corellians we are familiar with, the cute class Corellian as they're called, the big sphere of wind, but we see these monsters, we see thousands of these monsters spiraling around them just to kind of like sell the nature of this apocalyptic natural event there. We should point out that this emergence is triggered deliberately by the Agaha squad, who are using the bunker buster weapons that were briefly alluded to at the end of episode 30 to strike presumably at sort of the more vulnerable parts of the Corellian deep underground there. They've also taken over effectively field command from Dominic, who is being shoved to one side. Captain Jurgens is back as well, and he's clearly not particularly thrilled about being ordered around by a bunch of perky teens. But
Dominic has been demoted to babysitter. Also, I get the feeling Dewey is basically doing an Ozymandias. Like he is...
How do you mean?
He's sort of forcing an alien enemy onto mankind in order to advance his own political agenda.
I guess, but I think, like, if you... spoilers, we are talking about the ending of the comic book Watchmen.
Yes.
But I feel like the thing about the Ozymandias thing in particular is that it's a fake, right? It is a trick.
Right.
But the idea of, like, engineering a crisis and then taking advantage of that crisis to, like, propel yourself to the top of the pole, that's older. Like, that's human history.
Course.
That's older than dirt. Like, that, and in a very real way, I believe that Dewey thinks the Corellians are a real threat, but he is also deliberately bringing the threat forward either because he wants to take advantage of it to propel himself to power, or he believes that the confrontation is better now rather than in the inevitable future, or both. You know, he could be both a zealot and a cynic. It's hard to say at this point.
He's an accelerationist in any case.
Yes, exactly. There. And he shows a great deal of empathy for Anemone here when Dominic protests that she is not well. He just points out that Dominic has more than enough evil woman juice to make her do anything he wants her to do. A couple of things worth pointing out as well: the emergence, like the attack on the Corellian and the emergence of the antibody Corellians is sensed by Eureka. Like she feels the damage in the same way that Obi-Wan felt the Death Star destroy Alderaan, right? She feels it through the Force or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Anemone kind of also does.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it?
Which is a sort of tacit confirmation that she's also a Corellian, or at least adjacent to Corellians.
I mean, that they have... all along they have shared several motifs, right? Particularly the eyes, which, as we will see in the next episode, the eyes are particularly notable in terms of identifying Corellians. But yes, I mean, again, we see the mirror between Anemone and Eureka, right? They both react pretty much in the same way to this attack, which is through incredible anguish, but the difference is that whereas Eureka has her friends to nurse her back to health and comfort her, Anemone is instead told to get in the robot.
Yeah, get in the robot, Anemone, or Dominic is going to have to do it again.
No, Dominic would never do that. But, Holland has some big talk about how this is the awakening, which is about the most portentous generic term you can possibly imagine there. And yeah, it ends with the Gecko and the Nervash and all of her repair team are loaded onto the Gecko because they're going to have to continue to work while they're in transit because the shit is hitting the fan and it's time to get going there. There is one other thing I want to mention in this episode, which is at some point, I think it's Eureka, when they're looking at the rebuilding Nervash, she goes, "Oh, it looks completely different." And I'm like, no, No, it doesn't. It looks pretty much the same as it did before. We will see next episode that it still looks pretty much the same as it did before. It's not that different. Like,
toy design department, you did a bad job.
Yeah, I mean, I get it, but yes.
At least when Kamen Rider gets a cool power-up, he gets a new color scheme.
Yeah, I mean, the Navash has a new color scheme. The back of its legs are black now. Yeah. Anyway, with that, let's move on to episode 32, Start It Up. Now, this one is a reference to a song by the American New York-based DJ Joey Beltram. He was an early pioneer in the late 80s, early 90s of the rave and underground sound there. He's not especially well known. It's another super deep cut there. But one fun fact, he is name-checked by Daft Punk in the song Teachers off their debut album Homework there. Another figure who's very well regarded in the scene, but less of a household name than some other artists we've seen here. So I will put the song in the post as always there. We have to start this episode by talking about what the fuck is Dominic wearing? So this episode begins with like Dominic and the Agaha squad inspecting the fallout of the city that they have razed by calling up the Corellians there. And there's no other way to put this. Dominic looks like he's wearing a hazard suit with a giant light bulb on top.
Yeah, he's cosplaying as a light bulb.
So this is a really far out suggestion, but could this possibly be a reference to the famous Red Hot Chili Peppers Woodstock performance where they dressed as gigantic light bulbs?
I don't know. I get the feeling this is sort of like because the idea is that the sort of the fitting of the light bulb is a kind of breathing tube,
yes,
right?
I know. But it's a breathing tube. It's just such a specific look. Like, there's no denying it. Like, this is not a just if you squint. He is wearing a giant light bulb. There is no other way to describe it. And I'm just casting around for some reason why you would describe it. Why you would do it like this. Really.
I guess the character designer just looked at a light bulb and was like, "Hey, these kind of look like the bubble head hazmat suits. They kind of look like Mysterio from Spider-Man."
Yeah, I guess it's just such a weird image that I had to bring it up at least because it is so bizarre.
I guess they are. Yeah, maybe they are homaging a Woodstock performance because that city sure looks like the fallout of Woodstock '99. Am I right, folks?
But the city is not looking great. The Agaha squad once again demonstrate that they are cold and unfeeling by just saying that to count one casualty, you should just count 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, and that counts as a person. It doesn't matter who they're attached to, just 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head.
I mean, that's generous.
I guess, yeah. Dominic also notes that the emergence of the antibody Corellians lasted for exactly 1,246 seconds, a number which will become important. Well, the importance of which will be revealed at the end of the episode. There,
I am not a math whiz. Is that like a number with a certain significance?
Not really. No.
Is it like a hexadecimal or something? I don't know.
No, I don't think it's a number of any significance. If we're wrong, tell us, because
math nerds sound off in the comments.
Certainly was not a great mathematician even in school, and that was a long time ago at this point. So yes, tell us if it is a significant number, but as far as I can tell, it's just random, basically. We didn't mention it last episode, actually, because it's more relevant to this episode, but it's also revealed that the Navash's new board has to be made by a specialist, and that specialist is, of course, good old Grandpa Thurston back in Bell Forest. And we see him in this episode, and he is being bothered by teens, as usual.
I do like how the teens continue to hang out at his place, even though they know that Renton is not necessarily coming back. Like,
I mean, the whole reason Renton is not there is because it's a town with nothing to do, right? Especially now it's under military occupation. There aren't even any boys their own age they can harass anymore. So I think it's cute how he gives them plausible deniability. The whole you're going to go away and you didn't see anything, you didn't hear anything, you don't know anything about this. But yes, always fun to see Axel again in a typically grumpy mode there. And sort of this episode kind of has the Axel plot and the Gecko plot, and they sort of crash together at the end.
Right. But I'm not sure if you can even call Axel's thing a subplot. It's more like it's more like a
sequence.
Right. Like we briefly see what he is up to before his contribution to the plot becomes necessary.
Yeah, I guess. So there's a good emotional payoff to it at the end there. But yes, you're right. It's more like a story thread than a dedicated subplot there. We do see that despite Holland giving a speech at the end of the last episode about how they couldn't go to help people because they had more important things to do, we do see here that they have actually responded to an SOS call and are helping deliver humanitarian aid, presumably.
I mean, I like this because it shows that pragmatism goes both ways, right?
Yes.
On one hand, it would be stupid for them to fly into the disaster to go help people because it would waste time, resources, and endanger them. But they can totally help people out who have managed to escape. Like it goes both ways. It goes both ways, and it's nice to show that when Talho and Holland made that call in the last episode, they did so not because they are cold bastards, but because they were genuinely concerned about whether it would actually make a difference, and knowing that when they can do a good thing with the power that they have, they will do it.
Yeah, and we get some good little scenes here of Renton carrying the box and having trouble lifting it over his head and stuff like that. But this sequence mostly exists to put Eureka through the ringer again in the form of this little boy, who appears to be coping with the stress of having his parents die in front of his eyes in a horrible accident pretty well.
Yeah, he is very cheerfully being selectively mute after the death of his parents.
I mean, look, I am not an expert in children's response to massive trauma, but regardless of how well he's doing for now, he certainly does not do well when he bumps into Eureka and sees her weird eyes, which remind him, of course, of the weird eyes of all the monsters who were attacking the city, some of whom were literally just giant eyeballs. So the eye motif, very much a big thing among these antibody Corellians.
It's an easy shorthand to make something look scary and alien.
I get what they're trying to do with this scene, but it feels, again, very unsubtle and gratuitous.
On the nose,
really.
yes.
Yeah, it's like, it's what is the most blatant way we can convey that people see Eureka as an alien and give her angst and stress, and it's well, let's have this cheerful child reduced to this pants-wetting sobbing wreck, and it's just was this really necessary? It's very it's a bit OTT, bit over the top.
Yeah, a lot of the quote-unquote suffering that Eureka goes through is very over the top. Her pathetically flailing around with the heavy box because she's just so delicate and dainty and weak. She goes through such over-the-top levels of hardship.
Right.
They're laying it on a little bit thick. We get it. We get it.
Yes, and, it's a cartoon. Obviously, we are trying to do drama. But yes, it does feel a little over the top here. I don't really think that Talho slapping her up a few times here is justified either. We are past the worst of the Bright Noah school of
child raising.
Child raising, but it's still popping up now and again, and the entire scene, it's not a bad scene. I think it would have been a much better scene if they had played it 50% lower key.
Right. She may have burned the littlest cancer patient hat, but she remains a littlest cancer patient in her heart.
Yes, and also just, it's so melodramatic. That's the thing. I think a subtler, more sort of low-key scene could have got the same message across without all the big drama there.
But yeah, Eureka is just never allowed to catch a break ever.
Yes. Meanwhile, the Agaha squad have decided to nuke another city to test their hypothesis. Well, I say decided. Dewey has decided. They're just gleefully going along with it.
Well, they were a couple of kilometers off last time, so...
Dominic is clearly not into this, but he's not into it enough to, like, openly resist what the squad are doing. Jurgens also doesn't seem psyched either, but, you know, he's got to follow his orders.
Also, the thing with Jurgens is he's never psyched about anything, so is this really a crisis of confidence, or is this just him punching the clock as usual?
Do you mean a crisis of conscience?
Conscience, yes, sorry.
Yes. It's okay, don't worry. Yes, I mean, like, look, Jurgens is not much of a character, he's a background character, but I think the point that this scene is trying to make is that, like, the plan has now gotten cartoonishly evil enough that even the bad guys are doing the are we the baddies bit. But the Agaha squad, you know, they are perfect little dolls who are willing to, who revel in causing pain and suffering. So they're all on board with this. We also learn that the city they're about to target is conveniently the exact same place that they're going to dispatch the Nervash's board to, one of those magical bits of plot engineering. This would probably be way more egregious if they did it a bunch, but we haven't had isn't that a coincidence thing in a while, so it's sort of, it's neither here nor there.
I mean,
really.
It's also kind of weird because the setting of this show is sort of nebulous enough that they can just make up cities as they please.
Yeah, and, you know, a lot of the plot of this relies upon setting the board off on a ley line, which is implied to be like, well, we've seen before that it's an extremely strong current of trapar, but it's just one of those weird plot coincidences, which is fine if you do it once in a while, but would perhaps become a little egregious if they did it too much there. But
I guess you could, like, optimistically see this as Dewey sort of chasing or like deciding his targets based on where the gecko is?
I guess, but there's no real indication that that's where they're headed, right? And the implication seems to be that these sites were plotted out well in advance before anything else.
Or it's just the nearest city, and it would make sense for the gecko to evacuate to the nearest city.
Yeah, you know, I think it is just one of those plot coincidences that you have to accept if the story is going to get going at all.
Suspension of disbelief, you know, exactly. Create tension. Things need to have, like, the villains and the heroes need to be in the same place, even though there is no logical reason for them to be, like...
Yeah. It does also give us this great sequence where Axel says, "Fuck the police," and he and his, like, close-eyed ref board dude friend bug out and blow up the workshop and probably kill a lot of those police dudes in the process.
First he paralyzes them with rock and roll music.
Yes. And he lifts up that tank with a forklift, and then, he just blows the building. And this is pretty cool.
He manages to jump from that forklift into the truck without horribly injuring himself.
Yes. We learn here that his plan is basically what I said before, you know, because he cannot deliver the board in person because he's being chased by the police. He's going to set it on the ley line and basically have it kind of like sail downstream to the rendezvous point, which is cool and like another cool reminder of like the mutability of the ley lines, you know, treating them like a canal or a river or something like that. It's also fun when you remember that when Dominic visited Belforest a while back, what did he find Axel first doing? He was flying a kite. So just like one of those fun little bits of subtle setup and payoff there. But yes, you know, it's not entirely clear the process that they are going through to try and set this board up, but it basically ends with Axel and his friend Thelma and Louising themselves off the edge of a cliff in a very dramatic thing to try and get the board up to momentum, presumably, so it can...
I mean, I think you're right on the money in that it sort of works like a river, you know, and it's like they're putting baby Moses in the basket on the river and make it flow down the river to reach its destination. So Yeah, they need to get it to a certain speed and altitude.
Yeah. The only other thing I want to say about this sequence, other than noting that it's neat, is that like Axel starts doing the he was a child but now he's grown up thing in the middle of the chase, and I'm like, dude, there's probably a better time to be reminiscing than this, honestly. But anyway, back with our military friends, it turns out Dominic has finally had a crisis of conscience and decided that he's not willing to give Anemone the bad person juice to make her go out and do what Dewey wants. Unfortunately, it turns out that the Agaha squad have no such compulsions and just shoot her full of that crap.
Yeah. Congratulations, Dominic. You got taken out by a couple of teenage girls.
I mean, there are 4 of them, admittedly, and we know Dominic is completely useless in every way. So, you know.
Yeah.
But yes, an Anemone is sent out basically as an advanced scout to observe the effects of the second missile strike.
But of course, she's been shot up with evil woman juice, so she's not just going to, hover around and observe things. She's going to want to destroy and kill things.
Yes, and it turns out that just as the strike begins, this is the exact moment that the gecko shows up to retrieve the board, which has still not appeared. And naturally, the moment that she sees the gecko, Anemone decides that screw orders, she is instead going to blow them out of the sky. There. Turns out that maybe making an unstable psychopath your lead scout is not entirely a good military practice.
Well, good thing Dewey seems to have a backup plan. I think Anemone's usefulness has an expiration date.
Certainly she is not as highly figured in his plans as she was 24 episodes ago,
right?
Let's say. But yes, to make a long story short, Renton and Eureka decide to jump out of the gecko, even though the board has not yet arrived, and I think there's a good little bit here where Renton is like, I believe in my grandfather, the board will definitely be here, I'm going to take a leap of faith. And
to the point where it's not even a tense moment. Like, Renton's faith is so certain that there is not even the slightest indication that this might be a risky move, right?
Yeah, and obviously the audience knows from an external perspective that it is not a risky move. But I think they play it instead of for tension, they play it for pathos, and I think it does quite well in that regard. I think
gives you, the cool moment when the board arrives right in time, and
yes,
the Nervesh jumps onto it and does some cool flips.
Yep, it has a cool new Wave Rider form now, which is one of the more half-assed transformations I've seen in robots. But we do get an iconic Eureka 7 moment here, which is the debut of the Ends homing lasers, which is as insane as it sounds. There's no way this should work, but it is a really, really iconic aspect of the End.
Wouldn't be a mecha show without some Macross missile massacre.
Well, yeah, but we have had traditional Itano circuses up to this point, but doing it with lasers is a step beyond even that.
Smart lasers.
Yes, and it does lead to some memorable images, let's say, but it's too bad that Anemone did not account for the fact that she was just going to get Kamehameha into oblivion, because now...
Yeah, it's kind of like the Rasengan. He makes like a little Corellian, like cute A-class Corellian in his hand and sort of pushes it into her, causing an explosion.
I think it's just something that looks cool.
Yeah,
frankly.
yeah.
I mean, we get the awesome shot of like the End's armor and skin being stripped off there, and then Anemone just eats shit like Wile E. Coyote falling off a cliff, basically.
The Worf effect.
Yes, and it's worth pointing out that there's apparently another massacre happening at the precise point. This is, that city sure is getting massacred, but it's not
nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, it's not particularly important to the to what's happening on screen at the moment, so we're just going to acknowledge it in passing there. But
this isn't about them.
Yes. The new Nervesh is cool, and you should go out and buy toys of it immediately. There's a 7 swell effect. And we learned that the significance of the 1,246 seconds is that the attack of the antibody Corellians lasts exactly as long as the 7 swell effect does.
So this is some kind of sacred time span, or like a significant time span for anything that has to do with Corellians.
I mean,
mysterious phenomena.
Yeah, I think the more overriding thing is that it is another manifestation of the same power, right? The same. Right. Both of these things come from the same place. It's
two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. What significance does that have? We don't know at this point. That's something that we will explore in future episodes, I'm sure there. And we've got a little bit of a clean-up to do at the end of this episode as well. We find out that Axel and his friend did not, in fact, go over the cliff with their launching truck. In fact, they bailed at the very last moment there in Grand.
Cop out as all this time.
Yes. And we get another nice, touching scene where Axel, in a traditional grumpy old man move, bills his grandson for the delivery of the board, and then there's a very sweet letter from Axel where he's like, "Hey, I'm going on the run. I'm like a wanted man now because I killed all those cops." So
and collaborated with anti-establishment,
anti-government
terrorists.
Yeah, I feel sorry for his friend who never. I never asked for this.
I mean, he kind of did ask for it. He helped Axel.
Yes, I know. But yeah, there's a good shot of them in traditional anime disguise, which is to say they wrapped them some scarves up and put some dark glasses on, and now they are completely invisible to the eyes of the law.
If it works for the Digimon, it works for fugitives.
Yes, absolutely. And Anemone, it turns out, is having a really bad time. She is just all over the shop. Gulliver is equally all over the shop because he's being hugged and abused in various ways. And it turns out the only people who are really happy about anything are the Agaha squad, who are all smiles because they got to wipe out another city and provide themselves with valuable data. And we close...
Yeah, we close on Dewey revealing his freaking Doctor Doom map of the world with every mare marked where he's going to do an alien invasion.
Yes, he's Ernst, Stavro, Blofeld. Here are all the targets I plan to hit there. So yeah, things have escalated pretty fast by the end of this episode, I would say. Yeah, it's a pretty action-packed pair of episodes. Any final thoughts on episode 32, or really the pair of episodes in general?
A very plot-heavy sort of series of episodes that does, it pays off a lot. It pays off a lot of, plot lines that have been sort of simmering in the background, right? Especially with regards to Dewey and the Agaha squad. They're finally stepping into the spotlight and showing the true depths of their depravity. But I think the Gecko State still get a couple of fun moments here, even though the also rans are kind of on the background for these two episodes. But Renton and Eureka get some fun stuff. Talho gets to show off that she has matured and become a more responsible person. There's some good stuff for Misha. There's some good stuff for Axel. So overall, pretty eventful, but a pair of eventful episodes that nevertheless continue the sort of hot streak that the show has been on.
Yeah, I think the word which comes to mind when looking at these two episodes, to me at least, is escalation, right? We have escalated so much beyond the initial parts of the story, even beyond the Ray and Charles arc, which was a very small scale personal arc. Now we are fully into the classic mecha show. It's the end of the world as we know it, and we must somehow fight to save the world.
We've had the sort of personal arc where you get the idea, because throughout the Ray and Charles arc, I always got to they can't possibly make things even more traumatizing for Renton, can they? And then they continue to one-up themselves, and now that they have sort of laid off on that, now they're just going, they can't possibly make things even more horrifying for the world at large. So expect things to continue to get worse and worse and worse until the end of the show.
I mean, look, this is a post-Evangelion mecha show. It has to end with like some sort of world-threatening eldritch horror, right? And that's kind of where we're headed.
Yeah.
I think that one gratifying thing about Eureka 7 in general is that when characters develop, generally they get to keep their character development, and so it's not much of a spoiler to say that we are going to get more traumatic things for Renton and Eureka going forward, and there are going to be more tough times for the crew. But we're not going to go back to kind of like mopey, selfish, self-absorbed Renton, and we're not going to go back to kind of like cold, emotionless, distant Eureka. There's going to be difficulties presented to them, of course, but they get to build on their existing characterization rather than have to reset back to the beginning there. I think that's one of the important things about the show in general. And with that, we are fully into the story that will effectively carry us to the end. This battle between Dewey and his military forces looking to destroy the Corellian, and Renton and Eureka and the Gecko State basically looking for another way. If there is another way, is there a way for humanity and the Corellians to live side by side? We don't know yet, but we have certainly spilled a lot of blood trying to find out already there. With that, we are at the end of another episode of Blue Mondays. So in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be looking at episode 33, Pacific State, one of my personal favourite episodes, and I think one of the most iconic of all Eureka 7 episodes. I'm sure G will back me up on that when he returns, but a very important episode in
Exciting.
Either way. And also episode 34, Inner Flight there. Both of these, obviously, we are going to be cranking on with the antibody Corellians, the Dewey stuff. We're really getting into high gear at the moment there.
No more time for tomfoolery.
Well, there's always time for a bit of tomfoolery, right? There are going to be breather episodes coming up, but definitely we are going to begin to see the shape of the plot that will take us through to the end, as I was saying. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much, Aquagaze.
You're welcome.
And as always, thank you everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, you can subscribe to us on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher, on YouTube, of course. Leave us a like, leave us a comment, let us know what you think, let us know how you're feeling about the show, and we'll see you all next time.